You know when you try a pretty popular gaming franchise for the first time, and the only thing you can do is asking yourself, why the fuck didn't I play this sooner? That's the experience I had with Mass Effect. I thought the first game was really good. I had an awesome adventure. Then I played Mass Effect 2 and holy moly, I was hooked. I felt like I went back in time to the days where I could just play a video game and forget about everything that was going on in this world. The moment I realized how much I loved this game was like a week ago. I was pretty tired after a long day. I was free the next day, so around 10 p.m. I was going to just wind down by playing for like an hour. I played until around 5:30 a.m. and it felt like 3 seconds. I realized that so much time had passed when I went upstairs to brush my teeth and saw the sun rising. Yeah, Mass Effect 2 is one of my favorite games of all time now. I'm 5 hours into Mass Effect 3 and I have some concerns about it, but overall, I'm really enjoying it. I'm planning to review each game, but that is a pretty big project, and I need to talk about this now. A lot of these dumb kids around my age haven't played Mass Effect, so I'm gonna let you know that you should go play it. And if you aren't convinced yet, I'm gonna try to tell you why I now love Mass Effect. Actually, if you aren't convinced after getting yelled at by a stick figure, I don't know what will get the job done. But I will try. So, we start off with the basics. What is Mass Effect? Well, if I quote Mass Effect's Wikipedia page, it's a form of mass negating technology allowing the creation of physics phenomena like artificial gravity or FTL travel. And yeah, that sums it up pretty well, but it probably wasn't the answer you were looking for. You probably don't want to know what Mass Effect in Mass Effect means. At least, that's probably not the first question you ask. But what is Mass Effect for a type of game? Well, I see it as an action RPG that's heavily focused on story and character development. It definitely has some interesting combat, and the gameplay is really solid. It lets you think through and you have several ways to face different encounters. The story is one of the best I have experienced. It shows that characters that aren't the protagonist can be fleshed out and have so many different dimensions of depth. It makes you choose how you will approach different characters, and your actions actually impacts the story pretty heavily. Your actions impact the story so much that if you play the Legendary Edition, the decisions you make in one game can actually affect the story in the upcoming games. And you really get to know all the characters, which makes you care about them. And that makes the decision making so much harder. Sounds interesting? Then stop watching and go play it. If you want to hear more, I will go into more detail in the rest of the video while avoiding major spoilers. As I mentioned, Mass Effect really makes the player involved with the story. You are more or less building your own character, and by certain actions, you will unlock different options when talking to other characters. You have two different kinds of stat, Paragon and Renegade. You gain Paragon when you are being nice and thoughtful, and you gain Renegade when you are being a complete ass. And that's the beauty of it. If you want to play the whole game as a complete asshole, you can. I haven't completed the trilogy yet, and I can already see how much replay value these games have. Hell, the game even makes you feel good about punching a journalist. That sounds bad, but you'll understand when you play the games. So, Mass Effect has this wheel during cutscenes when you will choose how to approach the situation, which sounds simple, but games like Fallout 4 shows how bad it can be if not being handled correctly. I think Mass Effect does a fantastic job in this area. I feel like I can choose how I want to approach the other characters and how much I want to get to know them. Things like being able to romance different characters can sound silly to some, but I think the good romance options actually makes you to get to know the characters on a deeper level. And by the way, rejecting a character you care about because you're experimenting is the deepest form of pain. My main point is that the game makes it so that you are able to flesh out the other characters a lot. And it's not all serious either.
You said the collectors had no art. I had no idea you cared about that kind of thing.
Personal interest negligible. Sang a little. Multi-species productions for cultural exploration. Gilbert and Sullivan always had me do the patter songs. But not about me. Cultural artistic expression reflects philosophical evolution, interest in growth, perspective, observation, interpretation. Suspect you won't see any art in collector base. Culturally dead. Tools for reapers. Worse than the Geth.
I'm sorry. I know that was important, but you performed Gilbert and Sullivan?
I am the very model of a scientist Solarian. I've studied species Turian, Asari, and Batarian. I'm quite good at genetics as a subset of biology because I am an expert which I know as a tautology. My xenoscience studies range from urban to agrarian. I am the very model of a scientist Solarian.
There is, however, a downside with this format, and that is the fact that the main antagonist, they are pretty bland. Maybe the third game will tell me more, but I have heard that the ending in Mass Effect 3 is a bit of a lackluster. But hey, I don't know yet, maybe it's fantastic. What I'm trying to say is that if you're looking for a story that's really action-packed and has the best and most fleshed out antagonist, I will just recommend you to play the OG Halo trilogy. Mass Effect has a lot of badass moments and is pretty action-packed, don't get me wrong. It's just that Mass Effect tries to tell a different story compared to, for example, the old Halo games. The stories in the story, if that makes sense, are what the writers clearly focused on in Mass Effect. And I love that. It's not just your crewmates that you get to know. The world feels very alive, and everywhere you go you will find random and interesting dialogue. For example, on your ship in Mass Effect 2 there is a room called crew quarters or something like that, and in that room you will find 2 NPCs that will give you from time to time new dialogue after a mission that you can listen to. And it's very well written. I of course don't want to spoil it, but it is a man talking to a woman about why he has accepted this mission and his worries about his family back home. That is just an example of one of my favorite quote-unquote hidden mini-story, and there are probably several more that I have missed. See, Mass Effect's writing focuses more on how the conflict affects people rather than the conflict itself. And I would say that's the main reason why Mass Effect 2 is now one of my favorite games of all time. The next thing I want to talk about is the lore. Mass Effect has a lot of lore, and I mean a lot. I was absolutely amazed when I played the first game over a feature called Codex. How it works is basically when you find out about something in the game, you often get a codex that goes deeper into the meaning of that thing. It can be materialistic things like ships or weapons, or stuff like places, different species, abilities, different individuals and whatever. The first game had more codexes than my brain could possibly take in during one playthrough. Then the second game introduced secondary codexes that go into even more nerdy details. What's great is that the player can choose how much of this they want to take in. If they don't care, they don't have to read. I personally just read as much as I feel like, and I find it the most interesting, for example if I want to learn more about a character that I really like. But I can just imagine that this is a goldmine for people that really like to dig into the deeper lore of things. I find the gameplay to be really solid and very fun. It's a third-person shooter, and you always have 2 squad mates. You can send your squad mates to different locations and also decide which weapons they are going to have. You also have access to a few abilities that, if used correctly, can be very powerful. Your squad mates have abilities as well, and you can control which ability they are gonna use next. Your crew back on the ship will have different abilities and stats depending on which class they are, and therefore you need to think before you are choosing your 2 squad mates. You can also upgrade a lot of things, and you can upgrade your squad mate stats too. So basically there are a lot of different factors, and you need to take these things into consideration before you're going into an encounter, and you need to like these RPG elements if you're gonna enjoy the gameplay. But I really like it because it makes you think. I think the gameplay would be pretty generic without these kind of elements. There are basically tons of different strategies you can use in every combo of a squad, because you can give them different weapons and they can use different abilities, and you get even more strategic options when you think about the fact that you can choose which squad mates you want to take with you. And all of this probably contributes to the replay value as well. I say probably, of course, because, as I mentioned, I haven't replayed them yet. I will before reviewing them. And if you import your character in the Legendary Edition from Mass Effect 1 to Mass Effect 2, or from Mass Effect 2 to Mass Effect 3, you can decide which class your own character is gonna have. So that's another strategic option. Overall, I'm really sucked into Mass Effect because of the storytelling and the different personalities, but I really love the gameplay as well and the strategy behind it. I have one more thing I want to mention about these games, the exploration. You can explore and learn a lot about the Milky Way galaxy and the planets. I don't want to talk about this too much because obviously the best way to explore is to go in as blind as possible. But it's really good in the first two games, despite the games having different exploration systems. Sometimes you will even find hidden side quests that are pretty cool and a lot of fun. The third game has been a bit of a letdown for me in this regard so far, though the story has a good explanation for it. However, it doesn't change the fact that the game becomes a bit less fun because of it. But I don't want to talk about that too much, I just want to briefly mention it. Maybe I will have my mind completely changed after I have beaten the game. But yeah, overall, the exploration system is really good in the second game. I think it's the best in the first game. I'm just gonna say that you interact a lot more with the planets. But yeah, it's really good overall. To summarize, I find my first experience with Mass Effect to be absolutely delightful. I love the characters and I feel like the decisions that I make really have a big impact on the story. And the mini stories that the games also try to tell within the main story are also really good and give everything more depth and just make everything feel more alive. The action-filled gameplay is really good and has a lot of strategy behind it, and there is a lot to explore. I couldn't recommend Mass Effect Legendary Edition more, even though I haven't even finished the third game yet. I know that the games do stuff different in some areas, but I mainly just wanted to cover why I think Mass Effect is so great. Thank you so much for watching, I hope you liked it, and if any long-term Mass Effect fan is watching this, I hope you think that I made these games justice. Now, I'm gonna go and finish Mass Effect 3 and see if Mass Effect Andromeda is as bad as people say.